February 1st, 1974, 8:50 in the morning. Maria opens the office window on the 20th floor of the Joelma Building in São Paulo. The morning air feels fresh. She smiles, thinking about her daughter's birthday party that weekend. Down the hall, Roberto is joking with his coworkers about last night's soccer game. 12 floors below them, an air conditioning unit sparks. Nobody notices. Nobody hears the small pop. Nobody sees the tiny flame crawling up the wall behind a curtain. In exactly 11 minutes, Maria will be standing on the roof with nowhere to run. In exactly 11 minutes, Roberto will be making an impossible choice: jump or burn. But here's what nobody knew that morning. 26 years earlier, on that exact spot, a chemistry professor shot his mother in the head. Then he shot his two sisters. He dragged their bodies across the floor, leaving trails of blood. He threw them down a well in the backyard. When the police came, he shot himself. Neighbors heard screaming from that house for years. Afterward, they called it the Devil's House. They said the land was cursed. They said something evil lived in the soil there. The builders knew this story. Everyone in São Paulo knew this story, but they built the Joelma Building there anyway. 25 floors of glass and concrete on top of a mass grave. And on that Friday morning in 1974, 756 people were inside. Secretaries, bank managers, security guards, janitors, people with families waiting at home. People who had no idea they were standing on cursed ground. What I'm about to tell you isn't a horror movie. Every word is documented. Every death is real. And what happened after the fire, what people saw in that building, what they still see today, will make you question everything you think you know about death. So I need you to do something for me right now. Tell me in the comments, where are you from? What city? What country? Because after you hear this story, you're going to look at every tall building differently. You're going to check for exits everywhere you go. And late at night, when you're alone, you might start wondering if the dead really do leave, or if some tragedies are so horrible that the souls just stay trapped forever, reliving their final moments over and over again. Let me take you back to 1948. In downtown São Paulo, on a modest piece of land, there stood a simple house. Inside lived a young man named Paulo Ferreira de Camargo. He was only 26 years old, an assistant professor of chemistry at the University of São Paulo. Smart, ambitious, and to those who knew him, a little eccentric. His colleagues at the university whispered about his unusual experiments, particularly one involving a firearm to test how friction affected gunpowder. The university even reprimanded him for it. But Paulo lived with his family in that house, his mother, Benedicta, who was battling cancer, and his two sisters, Maria Antonieta and Cordelia. Maria suffered from epilepsy, Cordelia from schizophrenia. Paulo cared for them all, taking them regularly to the hospital for treatment. It was at the hospital where Paulo's life changed. He met a nurse named Isoltina dos Ameros. He fell deeply in love, but there was a problem. Isoltina's reputation wasn't exactly spotless in São Paulo's conservative social circles of the 1940s. She had lost her virginity before marriage, and in those days, that was enough to brand a woman as unacceptable. Paulo's mother and sisters despised her. They did everything in their power to keep Paulo and Isoltina apart, constantly interfering, constantly criticizing, constantly working to end the relationship. What happened next shocked the entire city of São Paulo. On November 23, 1948, neighbors began to notice something strange. The Camargo house had been quiet for days, too quiet. They hadn't seen Benedicta or the sisters. When they asked Paulo about his family, he gave the same answer every time with an unsettling calmness. They had gone to a farm in the countryside and would be away for a long time. But Paulo's half-brother didn't believe him. Something felt wrong. He contacted the police. When officers arrived at the house, they spoke with neighbors who reported hearing gunshots 19 days earlier. There had been strange movements near a newly constructed well in the backyard. The police searched the property. What they found in that well was horrifying. The bodies of Benedicta, Maria Antonieta, and Cordelia, all shot to death. Paulo had murdered his entire family. When he realized the police had discovered his crime, Paulo walked calmly to the bathroom and shot himself in the chest with the very same gun he had used to kill his mother and sisters. The neighborhood was in shock. People called it the crime of the pit. The house was boarded up, but locals soon reported hearing distant screams coming from the property, particularly near the well. Some said they heard cries echoing from inside the abandoned house. The place became known as the home of the devil. Eventually, in the early 1950s, the house was demolished, leaving just an empty lot. But the stories persisted. People avoided the land. They said it was cursed, tainted by the blood spilled there and by whatever darkness had driven Paulo to commit such an unthinkable act. But here's something even more disturbing. That land had a dark history long before Paulo Camargo ever lived there. According to local legends, centuries earlier, that same spot had been a pelourinho, a public torture post where slaves and criminals were tied up, whipped, tortured, and often executed in front of crowds. This continued until slavery was abolished in Brazil in 1888. Layer upon layer of suffering, violence, and death had soaked into that ground. 2 decades passed. The memory of Paulo Camargo faded for some. São Paulo was growing, modernizing. The surrounding homes were torn down to make way for new development. In 1971, a gleaming new building was completed on that very same cursed land. It was 25 stories tall, state-of-the-art, a symbol of Brazil's economic boom. They called it the Joelma Building. Some say the builders deliberately changed the entrance to a different street, trying to avoid any association with the old address where the murders had occurred. Whether that's true or not, the building opened in It was filled with offices, primarily occupied by Banco Crescel, one of Brazil's largest private investment banks at the time. Hundreds of employees worked there every day, totally unaware of the blood-soaked history beneath their feet. For 2 years, everything seemed fine. The Joelma Building was a success, buzzing with business. But then came February 1st, 1974. It was a Friday morning. At exactly 8:50 a.m., an employee on the 12th floor heard a strange sound, like glass breaking. He went to investigate and found an air conditioning unit overheating. Sparks were flying from the electrical wiring. He tried to turn off the power, but it was too late. The wiring was already on fire, climbing up the wall. Within seconds, the flames reached the curtains. The curtains ignited. The fire spread to the ceiling tiles, which were made of flammable cellulose. The wooden furniture caught fire. The carpets, the desks, stacked with paper documents. Everything was fuel. And there were no sprinklers, no fire alarms, no emergency lighting. The Joelma Building had been built before modern fire safety regulations existed. At that moment, there were 756 people inside the building. Most of them were bank employees who had just started their workday. The fire spread with terrifying speed. Within 20 minutes, the entire building from the 12th floor upward was engulfed in flames. The heat was unimaginable, reaching over 1,000 degrees Celsius in some areas. The building had only one central stairwell, and it wasn't fireproofed. As the fire climbed the stairs, it created what firefighters call a chimney effect. Hot air and smoke rushed upward through the stairwell at incredible speed, making it impossible for anyone above the 12th floor to escape downward. People on the lower floors reacted quickly. About 300 employees managed to evacuate using the stairs and elevators before the smoke became too thick. But for those on the upper floors, there was nowhere to go. The single stairway was filled with fire and smoke. The building had no emergency exits, no fire escapes on the outside, nothing. Clara Lucia Dias Gomez was one of the first people to escape. When she reached the street and looked back at the building, she was in shock. Flames were already racing up the side of the structure. People were appearing at windows, screaming for help. And then, to her horror, she saw people jumping. Firefighters arrived around 9:10 a.m., just 20 minutes after the fire started. But by then, the situation was already catastrophic. Their ladders could only reach the 14th floor. Everyone above that was trapped. From the street, witnesses and rescue personnel shouted up at the people in the windows, holding up signs, begging them to stay calm, to wait for help. But the heat was unbearable. The smoke was suffocating. 40 people made the desperate decision to jump, hoping somehow to reach the fire ladders far below, or simply choosing a quick death over burning alive. None of them survived the fall. Inside the building, desperation took hold. 13 people crowded into one of the elevators, thinking it was their only chance. Using an elevator during a fire goes against every safety rule, but they were out of options. The elevator descended partway, then stopped. It became a death trap. Smoke poured into the shaft. The heat was overwhelming. All 13 people died of smoke inhalation, and their bodies were so badly burned that they could never be identified. To this day, nobody knows who they were. On the roof, 171 people gathered, hoping that helicopters could save them. They could see the helicopters circling overhead, but the building had no helipad. The smoke was too thick, the heat too intense. The pilots couldn't land. They managed to rescue around 100 people by lowering ropes and harnesses, but it was agonizingly slow. Many people on the roof couldn't wait any longer. They could feel the heat rising through the roof, beneath their feet. A police officer performed an extraordinary act of bravery, rigging a rope between the Joelma Building and the neighboring structure. 18 people managed to cross to safety using that rope, crawling hand over hand high above the street. Edson Santana was one of the lucky ones. He was 19 years old and worked on the mezzanine level. Every Friday, he would go up to the 20th floor to collect documents from the Treasury Department. On February 1st, he had already gone back downstairs when the fire started. He evacuated quickly, but when he reached the pavement and looked back, he saw bodies on the ground. People who had jumped. He looked up and saw the building engulfed in flames. It was only then that the full horror hit him. Decades later, he would say that even 40 years after the fire, whenever he saw images of flames, everything came back to his mind. The trauma never left him. By 10:30 a.m., the fire began to subside. Not because firefighters had extinguished it, but because there was simply nothing left to burn. It had consumed everything. The fire was finally declared out at 1:30 p.m., more than 4 hours after it began. Fire crews, police, and medical teams entered the building. They found survivors hiding under roof tiles, tucked into corners where the flames hadn't reached, dazed and traumatized. But they also found the dead. Lots of them. The official death toll was 179, though some reports put the number as high as 189, or even 227. More than 300 people were injured. Many so severely burned that they died in the following weeks and months after enduring excruciating treatment. The Joelma Building fire became a national tragedy. It was the second worst skyscraper fire in history by death toll. After the World Trade Center attacks in 2001, the disaster led to immediate changes in fire safety laws, not just in Brazil, but around the world. Los Angeles, for example, passed a law requiring all tall buildings to have rooftop helipads for emergency evacuations. Brazil overhauled its building codes, mandating sprinklers, fire alarms, emergency exits, and fireproof stairwells. The Joelma fire taught the world a brutal lesson about the cost of neglecting safety. The building remained closed for 4 years. When it reopened in 1978, it had been completely renovated and renamed Edifício Praça da Bandeira, the Flag Square building. The owners hoped that changing the name would help people forget the tragedy. But you can't erase a memory like that. And according to many people, you can't erase the ghosts either. Here's where the story gets even stranger. The 13 unidentified victims from the elevator were buried together in anonymous graves at São Pedro Cemetery. Almost immediately, visitors to the cemetery began reporting strange phenomena. They heard distant screaming. They heard cries for help. Car lights in the cemetery parking lot would suddenly start flashing on their own, even when the cars were locked and empty. People claimed to see shadowy figures wandering among the gravestones at night. The graves of the 13 souls became a pilgrimage site. Visitors leave flowers, letters, messages, and always a glass of water on top of the memorials, a traditional offering for the dead in Brazilian culture. But the hauntings didn't stop at the cemetery. Inside the renamed building, employees and visitors began reporting unsettling experiences, particularly on floors above the 15th floor, where the fire ladders hadn't been able to reach. People claimed to see ghostly figures wandering the hallways. Lights would flicker on and off for no reason. Fire alarms would go off when there was no fire. Elevators would malfunction, stopping unexpectedly near the floors where the 13 victims had died. The stories became so widespread that in 2004, when the mayor's office assigned a team to work in the building, many of the workers refused to enter. They demanded that the building be blessed before they would set foot inside. A Buddhist monk was brought in to perform a purification ceremony. Afterward, she told reporters that she had cleansed the areas where the workers would be stationed, but she warned them clearly, she could do nothing about the spirits on the upper floors. They were still there. They had never left. So let me ask you this. Do you believe the land beneath the Joelma building is truly cursed? Was it the violence of Paulo Camargo's murders in 1948 that invited something dark to dwell there? Was it the centuries of torture and death at the old Pellegrino? Or was it simply a tragic coincidence, a series of terrible events that happened to occur in the same place? The rational explanation is clear. The fire was caused by a faulty air conditioner and a building that lacked even basic fire safety measures. But how do you explain the 13 unidentified bodies? How do you explain the reports of screaming from their graves? How do you explain the continued hauntings, the ghostly figures, the malfunctioning elevators, the oppressive feeling that so many people describe when they enter the upper floors of that building? The Joelma building still stands today. It's still in use. People work there every day. But many of those who enter, especially those who know the history, say they can feel something, a heaviness in the air, a sense that the walls remember, that the land remembers. Whether you believe in curses or not, one thing is undeniable. On February 1st, 1974, 179 people went to work in the morning and never came home. Their families were shattered. Their lives were cut short in one of the most horrific ways imaginable. And their memory lives on, not just in history books, but in the stories of those who survived, in the flowers left at anonymous graves, and in the whispers of those who say they've seen something unexplainable on the upper floors of a building that refuses to forget. So the next time you walk past a tall building, the next time you step into an elevator, remember the Joelma building. Remember to look for the emergency exits. Remember to know your escape routes, because the lesson of Joelma isn't just about ghosts or curses. It's about the fragility of life and the importance of being prepared for the unthinkable. Thank you for listening to this story. If it affected you the way it affected me, I want you to do something. Share it. Make sure people remember what happened at the Joelma building. Make sure those 179 victims are never forgotten. And most importantly, wherever you are right now, know where your nearest exit is, because you never know when you might need it. Stay safe out there.